Over the last couple of weeks, my tiny little hometown has been on the brink of disaster. If you're Australian, you've probably seen us on the news. The small towns on the New South Wales south coast, ravaged by bushfires. They say almost 100 houses have been lost, and although mine was thankfully not one of them, plenty of my mates are facing up to 18 months in temporary accommodation. These people have lost everything thanks to, allegedly, something as simple as a faulty power line. Well, that's the explanation they've given us. Honestly, it might be true. I'm not a fire investigator. But I did see something that makes me question the official line. The fire had been a worry for a couple of days before it really kicked off, smouldering barely contained in the hills like a snake, waiting for exactly the right moment to strike. And when it did strike, holy shit, did it do a proper job. It roared down onto the tiny little town with the ferocity of Armageddon itself. There was, quite literally, no time for most of us to do anything but get the fuck out and hope we'd have a town to come back to. Unfortunately for me, I couldn't run. I could get out of town, sure, but there was a problem. My girlfriend's parents live in the hills, right in the path of one of the ferocious rivers of flame that were now pouring down on my home. And they are stubborn old bastards. They've lived in that place their whole lives, so they weren't going to let it go up in smoke without damn near dying to save it. Which is how I found myself in the path of certain death, wrapped in far too many layers of clothes, waving a garden hose at hell itself. When we first got to the in-laws' place, all was quiet. They've weathered a few fires, so the house itself was prepared. And they live on the other side of town from the first point of impact, so the fire was still kilometers away. The signs were all there though. Thick smoke was creeping out of the bush, just starting the extension of murky fingers into every nook and cranny of the property. We didn't speak, the air thick with tension and fear. We just got about our business, filling everything we could with water and making sure the pumps were positioned in the right places by the dam and in good working order. As we scurried around like ants under a magnifying glass, the air got thicker, heavy with smoke and heat. Then, the fire was on us. I'm not hurrying things for dramatic effect, mind you. This thing roared out of the bush like a freight train. I've been in fires before, albeit not this close, so I was expecting it to happen quickly, but nothing like that. The noise and the heat were unbelievable, like a physical impact that sucked the air out of my lungs and filled the whole world with an endless screaming, tortured bellow. I have no idea how I managed to function, but somehow we started up the ancient fire hoses and began soaking the house. There is obviously no point fighting a 40-meter wall of flame with a dam pump. You need to try and stop the fire from bridging the gap from the trees to the property and hope against hope that the wind changes or that it exhausts its fuel enough that it becomes manageable. Thankfully, the gap here was a paddock, which is considerably better than the average backyard and gave us something of a fire break to work with. Without that, we would have been dead. Of that I have absolutely zero doubt. They tell you to evacuate for a reason. As terrifying as all this was, I began to realize something peculiar. The fire. It didn't look right. It didn't act the way a fire should. We were fighting ourselves to a standstill, but the fire never jumped. The wind was steady, and the temperature was soaring. There was theoretically nothing but our own grit stopping the flames from taking the house. I could even have believed that, because fire behaves in peculiar ways. I've lost count of the reports I've seen on the news of entire streets going up, except for one house, with no logical explanation as to why that sole structure was spared. I didn't have a chance then to really think about it, because both pumps died. It was like something killed them off. They both spluttered out and stopped exactly the same time. With no way to get the water out of the dams, we were suddenly in even more trouble. There was no reason for the pumps to die. They were well kept and well maintained. But maybe all the smoke had gotten into the motors. I don't know. All I knew was that we were in the deepest of shit. Look, we were stupid. I know that. We did just about everything wrong, starting with just not getting the hell out of there. But I can imagine how hard it is to abandon a lifetime of memories, and I wasn't going to let people who were essentially my family stand on their own. Of course, I hadn't planned on sitting neck deep in a dam while an inferno raged around me. We had sprinted for the dams when the pumps went out. As if on cue, the fire had reared up and swelled to a massive height the instant they spluttered and died, towering over the 2-story farmhouse. It was the single most terrifying moment of my life. Well, the single most terrifying until a few minutes later anyway. If you've never heard a bushfire, it's a sound that is almost indescribable. The crackling, popping roar is probably to be expected, but the screaming of sap and water boiling out of living trees, that's genuinely ghoulish. So there I was, sitting in a dam, surrounded by bellowing flame and the death screeches of 1,000 trees, certain of my impending death, when I started to hear the whispers. I honestly thought I was dying. Oxygen deprivation slowly but surely stealing my sanity before it snuffed me out. But it kept getting louder. Whispered voices swirled with the smoke, speaking a clear yet unrecognizable language. The whispers were throaty, almost growling, and utterly sinister. They rose to an almost deafening crescendo, drowning out the almost human screams emanating from the constantly exploding trees. I was surrounded by the voices of 1,000 demons, detached, disembodied, and all the more frightening for it. I started ducking my head under the dam, both to escape the infernal heat and to try and drown out the voices. But they came through loud and clear, even in the murky, ash-coated water. It was like they were a part of the fabric of the world around me, present no matter what I did. As they reached a level that made my ears throb in protest, I suddenly noticed the eyes. I'm honestly not sure if I hadn't seen them or if they just appeared. But all around me were pairs of deep, black orbs that seemed to be composed of thick smoke. You might think that I just saw smoke, and my brain, traumatized and terrified, created the image of eyes in the wisps and whirls that flitted between the flames. But the smoke from a bushfire, it's never black. And these orbs were as dark as the night sky. What's more, I noticed that each pair of orbs was attached to a tall pillar of flame, stoic and unflinching among the chaos of the fire. Hell, they might not have been eyes, but they sure looked like them, stuck on top of tall beings made entirely of fire. And every single one of them focused solely on me. The voices, now managing to sound like a sonic boom while still maintaining their whispering quality, turned into a sickening bellowing that I quickly realized was laughter. I saw an image that I still can't fully describe. A ruined world, desolate and ashen, flashed in front of my eyes. And then the fire that had raged so violently, in an instant, snuffed out entirely. The bush around the paddock was still burning, mind you. But the fire that I felt sure was going to kill me, that loomed over the dam almost within touching distance, was just gone. That just does not happen. The surface of the dam was thick with ash and muck, and I didn't much feel like hanging around. So I dragged myself onto the muddy shore and passed out. I spent a few days in hospital, mostly for dehydration and shock. It seems that I was the only one to see or hear anything unusual, apart from the sudden and inexplicable death of a raging inferno. Our car and everything in it was gone, reduced to a twisted shell of hot metal by the fire. The house we fought so hard to defend was, miraculously, still standing, albeit a little singed around the edges. In fact, I'd have passed the whole thing off as the spasms of a delirious mind, if not for what I saw a few days ago, when I headed back to the property. The grass that had been completely smothered by the fire, that we all saw burn when we were forced into the dams, was green and healthy. It looked as though the fire had skirted the property entirely. But we all knew that that had not been the case. The others thought it was strange, but they hadn't seen what I had, so they were happy to pass it off as some freak of nature. I might almost have believed them if I hadn't gone over to that dam that saved my life. Burned into the grass alongside the dam, clear as day, was a symbol. It was about 10 meters tall, half the length of the dam, and several meters wide. I've never seen anything like it. This thing looked a bit like a crucifix, but with an X radiating from the center point. I shuddered, suddenly recalling that awful image of destruction that had flashed in my mind before the fire died down. That exact same symbol had been burned into the ground I saw in my mind's eye, surrounded by utter devastation. As I shivered in horror, carrying gently on the wind and accompanying the smell of damp ash, I could swear I heard the faintest growling note of nauseating laughter.